So today's presentation is special, and I know many of you have been attending some of these, and we usually do them on a weeknight, but we have the great benefit of having someone from the other side of the big pond participating today, and also felt like the topic warranted a little extra time. So today we'll go for 90 minutes. But today's topic is climate justice and Prout. Raksha Mohan will be facilitating. It's a panel presentation. She will be facilitating. Raksha herself is a Prout activist. She serves and works with Prout Alliance, Proutist Universal at the global level, as well as serving on the board of the Prout Research Institute in North Carolina. So we're happy to have her involved in this. I want to do a promotion for three of you were involved, and Raksha was one, as co-authors in what ended up being a chapter in a book entitled Climate Adaptation, Accounts of Resilience, Self-Sufficiency and Systems Change. If you're not familiar with this book, I encourage you to track a copy down. There are some excellent articles by experts and people dedicated to this topic. And quite frankly, I think the chapter that the three of you put together was just excellent on Prout. So I encourage people to track that down when they have a chance. Raksha will, and by the way, that book was published in conjunction with COP26. Raksha will start today's program with kind of a summary of I guess what came out of COP27. I think many of you may be aware that recently concluded, and so she will kind of share her thoughts about what are the ramifications in terms of climate change coming out of COP27. And I guess the final point I will make is each presenter, she will introduce each presenter in turn. And at the end of their presentation, there will be a brief Q&A session. And then after all the panelists have done their presentations, there will be another Q&A that's open for questions or sharing comments with any of the panelists. So at this point, I will turn it over to Raksha.
Thank you. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to a panel discussion on climate justice on Prout. I will briefly summarize the outcomes of COP27. The recently concluded United Nations Climate Change Conference, COP27, has implications for social and climate justice. A global carbon project report states that the United States, in just 16 days, puts more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than Pakistan does in an entire year. Africa accounts for 15% of the world's population, but is responsible for only 3.8% of carbon emissions. India, the world's second largest consumer of coal, argues for not wanting to pay for a climate crisis that it didn't create with the money that it doesn't have. In the backdrop of these disparities in energy consumption and CO2 emissions by the developed and developing nations and differences of opinions, COP27 made a decision to set up a loss and damage fund to pay for the human and economic costs of climate change. This could be a form of long overdue climate reparation for which developing countries have been demanding. All funding arrangements before this have focused on cutting carbon dioxide emissions. Hence, this funding arrangement, the Loss and Damage Fund, is a historic first step which demands that the big polluters of the environment pay vulnerable communities for the loss and damage caused by climate catastrophes, which are a consequence of global temperature rise in the last century as a result of rapid industrialization. So while the details of Loss and Damage Fund are yet to be fully worked out, social and climate justice activists are demanding parties responsible for the payments ensure a no strings attached direct cash transfer to impacted countries and communities. At the same time, environmental groups note that this fund has been set up at the cost of neglecting transition to cleaner fuels and not holding countries responsible for phasing down fossil fuel consumption. There were 600 fossil fuel lobbyists at the COP27 conference this year. That is a 25% rise from the COP26 last year. Fossil fuel lobbyists outnumbered representatives from indigenous communities impacted by floods, droughts, and heat waves from around the world. Closer home, in the USA, forest fires are becoming the norm every summer. Hurricanes are becoming more intense as a result of climate change. Also, there is a serious drought situation in much of USA right now. Indigenous and poorer communities whose ways of life have been disrupted by climate change are most likely to be displaced from their homes. So when we think of climate justice, any form of climate justice should address the need to protect lives and livelihoods of impacted communities and also maintain a balance in the natural ecosystem. Progressive utilization theory, Prout, as a systems change socio-economic alternative, can offer solutions to address both local problems and global concerns. On that note, I invite our first speaker, Jason Schreiner. So Jason serves as the president of the Prout Institute in Oregon and is the associate director of teaching engagement program at the University of Oregon. Jason will be talking about PR Sarkar's praxis of regenerative ecology and its necessity for restoration of dynamic balance, effective implementation of Prout, and achievement of justice. So Jason, I invite you to share the screen and start your presentation. So like it was mentioned, at the end of each presentations, we'll have 5 minutes of Q&A for each presenters. And if we have more questions, then we'll take those questions at the end of the session after all presenters have presented. So Jason, all yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Raksha, and thank you all for being here. And I'm pleased and blessed to have this opportunity to share a few insights regarding the relationship between progressive utilization theory and climate justice. And can I do a hand check that my voice, that you can hear me okay? Great, thank you. I usually use headphones with a mic, but they broke, so I'm using the laptop mic. And I just want to say that with such a great lineup of presenters after me, I hope I can live up to the moment with my contribution. And with time being limited, I'm going to try to be short and on point. And as I usually use lots of visuals in presentations, today I'm going to flip that a little bit and use less visuals, and so that I can move through my comments. And what I want to do is move through three things. First is a brief reminder of PR Sarkar's insistence on principled action. And then I want to briefly note how climate justice is currently being framed at the leading edge of movement work towards that end. And then I want to indicate how PR Sarkar's notion of ecological balance, or as Raksha put it, it's a form of regenerative ecology, how that directs us to concrete action of a robust kind. And so those are the three movements. And I'll start by saying that towards the end of his life, Sarkar stated in the kind of eloquent way that he would often speak, he said, "Let the unique blending of your profound wisdom and intense urge for action rend asunder the mists of sinful deeds and smash to dust the jagged rocks of hypocrisy and establish you in the realm of supreme fulfillment." What I think is important from this quote, of course, is this balancing of knowledge and vision, or wisdom on the one hand, and action or implementation on the other. What concerns me most about the vision of PR Sarkar and Prout is how do we translate it into practical reality? As Sarkar put it, It's not enough for a person to merely understand and abide by the truth. Rather, it has to be translated into reality in the practical lives of living beings. Indeed, quote, we want no more gospels, or as Greta Thunberg puts it in relationship to climate change, no more blah, blah, blah. We want something practical for the elevation of the entire human race. And this means we must remember, quote, victory does not come by itself. Victory has to be invited and welcomed with sweat, the warmth of the blood, and the fiery flames of hard labor. And finally, quote, human beings will have to draw up all sorts of plans and programs for the collective welfare of universal humanity. This will accelerate the speed of our movement and enable us to easily remove the thorns from our path. I spend time with these quotes, and I think they're important to revisit because they reinforce the insistence on practicality, but practicality that's grounded in principles. And in terms of Sarkar's work, I think this is extremely important to remember. And if you have not lately or ever had the opportunity to read Sarkar's Vani, the yearly messages, sometimes 2 a year, everything I read came from those, except for one of them. And they read as a kind of epic for our times. But if you really read them carefully, you'll see a lot of insistence on this practicality. And I think that's an important touchstone. These injunctions, which came in the mid to late 1980s, are even more pertinent in what scientists now call the decisive decade for taking action to address climate change. And Raksha outlined the predicament we're in and the vast inequities in terms of who faces the harms and burdens versus the disproportionate lack of any benefit from the destructive actions that we have. In other words, if we're addressing climate change, it has to involve climate justice. Now, for 20 years, I've been teaching environmental justice and climate justice and related movements. And the idea is very straightforward. Those least responsible for causing environmental degradation and climate change bear a disproportionate share of the harm and have the least capacity or the least opportunity to engage in change. But that's shifting. So we cannot replicate that kind of inequity in a transition. And the transition to environmental or climate shift has to involve inherently a social justice component. It is inherently a social justice issue, and this has to be reinforced and remembered. I want to share an image. This is where I will share an image that highlights, I think, this fundamental point of climate justice and indicates where the climate justice movement is at in terms of its forward thinking. And so let me just share this. This comes from the Climate Justice Alliance. And I apologize if my image cuts off. It fit the entire slide. So, and in the recording, my head's going to cut off the top right where it says regenerative economy. I'm not going to talk through the entirety of this image, but what I want to highlight here is an understanding that there's an analysis of our current system, which is the extractive economy, as they call it here. There is a vision put forward of a new system that they call a regenerative economy. And then there's this in between, which indicates the work of transition. And what I want to call out here from this particular image is this framing around the notion that it has to be a just transition. And that justice is at the core of that. And then to reinforce that, if you look in the center of the circles for both economies, you'll see work is centered, not resources or the environment, not the worldview, not the purpose, but work. And one of the core reasons for this is the recognition, of course, that we have to engage in work in the world in order to live, to survive, and to thrive. And the reason why work is so centered in a just transition in the climate justice movement is the recognition that so many of the people doing the work of extractive industries are workers, but they have to do this work in order to make a living, to feed their families, and to support their communities. And we can't just do away with certain industries without some kind of a plan for how workers and people and communities will transition to something different. Now, in Oregon, where I live, this blew up in the famous jobs versus owls debate around forestry, as if you couldn't save owls without saving jobs. The framing became very muddled. The climate justice movement has seized upon the fact that addressing climate has to center economic activity. It is not just an environmental thing. In fact, many years ago, Tim DeChristopher, the activist, said one of the problems with the climate movement is it was initially framed as an environmental movement as opposed to an economic movement. But that has shifted. So I use this image just to indicate how the Climate Justice Alliance frames a just transition with work and productive activity at the center. In other words, we need a more progressive use of our resources and the ways in which we engage. So I'm going to stop my share. And I would invite you, if you have not already visited or taken a look at the work of the Climate Justice Alliance, that you have that opportunity to follow that up, and you can learn more about the kind of work they do in terms of the alliances that they build across very different social, racial, economic lines, and also the important work of indigenous communities across the different regions where they're working. So in putting that forward, I think it shows how if progressive utilization theory, or the work that many of us who are in this meeting support, overlaps and resonates with where I think the leading edge of the climate justice movement is at. And what I want to do for my small part in the time that I have left is to bring forward just one concept from the vast array of ideas in Prout, and that is this notion of ecological balance that P.R. Sarkar gave. This has both a philosophical and practical dimension to it. The philosophical dimension in Sanskrit terms is called prama, or balance, which sometimes is translated as dynamic equilibrium or dynamic equipoise. And this is the recognition not of a static state, but of a very dynamic, moving state, but one that balances our physical, mental, and spiritual spheres, as well as the balance between the individual and the human collective, and the balance between the human collective and larger ecology or cosmos. This double balancing is in fact the fundamental premise of Prout for those of us who've studied it. And so ecological balance or dynamic equilibrium is at the very core of what Prout is for. And the purpose of that, and as Sarkar put it, human movement is movement towards ecological equipoise, towards the supreme synthesis, unquote. So Sarkar clearly centers this notion of ecological balance and prama as fundamentally important and the purpose of Prout itself. Why else would we engage in the rigorous stir, the stir for life, vigor, and progress, as he put it in Idea and Ideology, one of his texts. So the way I like to put this in simple terms, and how Sarkar often articulated it, is that it's subjective approach through objective adjustment. Now, at the risk of oversimplification, this simply means that underlying our actions and the way we organize ourselves is some kind of idea or notion of purpose, that which is motivating us and that towards which we aim. As that Climate Justice Alliance slide showed, is our aim extraction and profitability for a few, or is our aim caring and sustenance for all? So to put it in very stark, simple terms. What's important about remembering this notion of prama is that Sarkar recognized, and it's recognized in the climate justice movement, that we live in a state that's wildly out of balance. And that if we want to bring balance back, that's going to involve a process. So a just transition involves a process. For Sarkar, because of the state of degeneration that we've entered, it becomes highly important to reinforce the existential physical basis of life as the first step to restoring balance. It is exceedingly difficult to pursue mental or spiritual fulfillment if your physical basic necessities are not met. So for Sarkar, in terms of climate specifically, restoring physical prana or balance has to begin with one of the most important variables affecting climate change that he identified, and that was trees or forests. The recognition of this as being important is because he's not only he did not speak so much about global climatic change as impacted by the burning of fossil fuels. He was deeply concerned with regional variations in climatic change, which is deeply connected to the forests and the water cycles. And so for him, ecological balance has to begin with reforestation. So he gives great emphasis to the creation of lakeside and riverside plantations of highly diversified productive plants that provide basic necessities as well as work and jobs and the materials that people need. And if you've never explored his talks on this, there are lists of some 50 plus plants given. Most of these are from his native region of West Bengal. But the principle is clear across multiple regions that we must establish an ecological balance through afforestation that focuses particularly on water catchment and the rebuilding of soils as the basis for building a productive economy, as well as restoring landscapes that allow people to live and help address carbon sequestration through the planting of the trees that help build the soil by maintaining the organic matter that the tree roots provide, and of course provide the different materials that people need for a productive economy. So what I want to offer as the kind of practical or practice here is to be thinking in terms of, if you want to contribute to climate justice, how and in what ways can the ecological balance of your region or your place be enhanced? And what Sarkar gives great emphasis to is this work of restoration and rehabilitation of forests and water. And how can you support that? So, for instance, we can stop further harm to our watersheds, to our forests. We can restore denuded and degraded watersheds and restore forests, as well as convert many of the current uses of those towards extraction and convert that towards other forms of industry. And of course, that also means supporting efforts where you have shared governance across regions. And this is the last point I have in the time I have. One of the things that Sarkar identified as a key cause of calamity, including environmental calamity, was the bifurcation or balkanization of society. When you have different groups based on nationalist lines or some other sentiment that carve up the land and then try to govern that on that basis, this undermines the ability to have shared governance or coordinated cooperation across the entirety of a bioregion, or in the case of a river, you have lack of communication between the hill region or the origin, the plain, and the delta, because it's carved up along these artificial political lines. So Sarkar gave great importance to the need to support efforts to work across governing jurisdictions and to establish a new sense of governance that's decentralized, which of course gets into the notions of Prout. I know my timer's gone off and I want to open up for a few questions. It's a very short amount of time in order to offer words, but I think it's just to reiterate the importance of principled action, the need to connect with the work that's on the ground happening in terms of climate justice, and focusing in on the restoration of balance at the most basic ecological level as the foundation for economic activity. And I know some of my other presenters have a lot more they can say on these factors. So let me open up to questions that anyone may have in the short time we have for that.
You can either raise your hands or type your questions on chat. Or we could come back to the questions later by the end of the presentation. Alex.
Thank you all for hosting this very important conversation. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Jason, you brought up a few very interesting points. So one of the key things I hear continuously in the activist circles is a kind of a focus on justice, but not actually a focus on the actual transitioning to the regenerative state of being. So how much of the justice movement is actually focused on the restoration of ecological systems directly, other than challenging capitalism, but conservation, planting new tree growth on top of limiting emissions? Because I think 90% of it is on limiting emissions.
Yeah. So yeah, this is 15 minutes is such a short time. So what I would make a distinction is the regions we're talking about. So in developed regions, or what we call overly developed regions of the global north, you have much of the focus is on stopping emissions. But if we turn our attention to what we call underdeveloped regions, as Walter Rodney put it, you find the attention is drastically different. So I could give case studies in India where the focus is not on limiting emissions, it's on regenerating despoiled landscapes in precisely the kind of way that Sarkar identified. And the recognition that it's not just about planting trees, but they have to be productive trees that are part of an economic vision that provides people with what they need in terms of livelihood, not just to survive, but also to take to market. So I will post a link to at least one collective I've been studying for 20 some years called the Timbuktu Collective in the Anantapur district of India, where they've done precisely this, using cooperatives, empowering the most marginalized in the community, the disabled and the Dalits and women in particular, as well as the youth, all based around a regenerative ecology with the aim of economic productivity. So the point I'm trying to make is that in many parts of the world, they get this idea that you're noting, that we can't just focus on limiting emissions or stopping the bad of capitalism. We have to build the new through integrated development, but I'm anticipating what others are going to talk about in that regard. Does that help, Alex, a little bit?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Jason, you may want to share that link to the case study if you can. And we'll take one more question before we go to the next panelist. So we have a question on chat. On the diagram presented by Jason, I read the requirements for a just transition. They do make sense to me, but are they achievable when we live in such a divided world?
Good question. I'm going to talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Jason, any closing thoughts? You did mention about balkanization of bioregions.
Yeah, well, this is a huge question that gets beyond my time here. And I'll just note that P.R. Sarkar's very last talk was precisely on the question of balkanization and the rising of political consciousness in response to it. And so I just want to reinforce the importance of addressing that issue.
Thank you, Jason. So we'll come back to more questions at the end of the panel discussion. So like Jason mentioned, we need a regenerative economy, an economy that restores balance. So on that note, I invite our next speaker, Shriraksha. Shri is a spiritual and environmental practitioner, co-founded Alliance for Economic Democracy in 2017 and founded Sunrise Ecologic in 2022. Shri brings her experience and expertise in ecological restoration to climate adaptation with the vision of providing equitable solutions to problems arising from climate change and habitat destruction. So Shri, I welcome you to share your screen and begin your presentation.
Good afternoon in Eastern Standard Time. Good day to the rest of you who have different parts of the day. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It's humbling to follow after that dense, excellent presentation. Thank you for the opportunity. I'll jump right in. The mission of Sunrise Ecologic is to restore our ecosystems one connection at a time. I'm a scientific practitioner and also have a background in psychology and recognize that connecting rivers or connecting habitat often involves connecting with people who may or may not agree that it's important. So what I have to do in order to restore ecosystems at a practitioner level is make and restore connections with people. The Alliance, next slide, there we go. The Alliance for Economic Democracy logo here is taken from this photograph of sunrise in the town of what is now Falmouth on the coast of southern Maine. And it's significant because it's looking out at two islands called the Two Brothers, where one of the last treaties was signed between the Abenaki people, which are a group of different tribally affiliated indigenous people in this land, the Don land, and the colonization of most of my ancestors and many of the people here, and decolonization and colonization is the context within which all anti-exploitation and climate adaptation work I engage with takes place in this landscape. So in a geological time scale, this is a graph of the various warming and cooling periods that our planet has been through over the last 500,000 years. And the y-axis is warmer temperatures at the top and cooler temperatures at the bottom. And you'll see this line across the middle is when the glacial, considered a glacial age and an interglacial age. And this red circle is about the last 2,000 years that have taken place on the planet. And you can see the kind of sine cosine wave here is, there's a pattern of increased global temperatures and decreased global temperatures. And you can see here that we are on a rise. And if you look at the connection, the historical track record, it would appear that we're on a precipice about looking at a next ice age. So we know another ice age is coming to the Earth. It'll bring an entire change on the structural side of the Earth. Before the coming ice age, there will be intellectual change and great biological change in human beings and animals in every entity, animate and inanimate. You'll find changes in the seasonal order, in the psychic arena, in the socioeconomical, political, and cultural spheres, and in biological structure. All are undergoing metamorphosis. The poles have already started shifting. And that is from The Coming Ice Age by P.R. Sarkar. And my screen, there we go. So this is a close-up of the last 2,000 years and those varying climactic temperatures that were so concerning are depicted here in the different colors. And you can see in the last 2,000 years that the variations of temperature, again, high temperature at the top of the y-axis, low temperature on the bottom, are extreme when you look at the warming and cooling periods. So that's the context of the Ice Age, and the current carbon emissions and climate adaptation conversation is focused mostly on reducing carbon emissions and the greenhouse effect that is created. So just very briefly, this diagram shows how the rays of the sun in the form of heat hit the Earth's surface, and without a excessive amount of carbon in the atmosphere, this heat is able to reduce into space and provide an overall warming and cooling that is a dynamic equipoise, if you will. But in this current industrial age, capitalist age, the red here represents the burning of carbon and the carbon emissions that go into the atmosphere and create this thick cloud that prevents the heat from releasing into the atmosphere, creating the greenhouse effect that we are within and working to adjust to. So that's the geological, ecological component of climate adaptation. Another realm that I work in, or I should say another dimension, is just the socio-economic political environment. And that involves working with people who have thoughts and opinions and their own cultures and sentiments. So the structure of the network where I am effective in managing ecological restoration programs and projects looks like this. So this is the Sunrise Ecologic logo here. And I work on a project basis, 4 towns, working with 4 towns currently as a part of the Maine Climate Council Climate Action 4-year plan, and provide services with 8 primary strategic areas identified by the Maine Climate Council. And I don't know if you can see them here, but just briefly: transportation, energy efficient buildings, public utility, clean energy, protect natural resource industries, protect natural resources, land, air, and water, build healthy and resilient communities, invest in climate-ready infrastructure, engage with the communities regarding climate impacts. And there was a technical and scientific advisory board and an equity committee that reviewed the strategies and actions that are in a pre-approved list for towns to locate, identify, prioritize, and fund their climate adaptation projects. And so that is what I'm helping the towns work with, and in relationship with other service providers represented by these logos that are all in this cooperative ecosystem, working in the context of climate adaptation here. And so I know my target audience, and I would say that that is critical to implementing climate adaptation, but I am still learning who all of you are and what is my target audience when I am presenting to Proutists. And I would like to get to know you better and understand what drives you, why are you here today, and what is important to you. Prakash, could you put the first poll up, please? And if those of you who haven't participated in a poll before on Zoom, you're going to have a box pop up, and I would like you to pick one of the options that you see on the screen in front of you as the most important thing to you. What is the most important to you here today? Why are you here?
Are people seeing the poll?
Yeah.
Yes, the poll is showing up.
And then once you click on that, oh, okay, so I'm sorry, just do number 1, not the second one. Learning what others are doing to replicate efforts locally, broadening my understanding of Prout theory and its application in the subject of climate justice, acting locally and networking with others to strengthen efforts, maintaining relationships with other Proutists, finding my role in the global climate movement. So I think there are 25 people participating, and so far we have 2 answers.
And there's a concern that the submit button is grayed out.
Yeah, I can't see it.
I'm not quite sure why that is. Let's see.
Maybe we have to answer both.
There's 2 questions, but
Yes, you have to answer both questions and then the submit button will light up.
Okay,
There's
All
not, there should be more options for number 2.
2 is multiple choice.
I know, but none of the answers fit.
Yeah, I agree.
You can make it larger.
Make what larger?
No, you can make the poll opens up in a window, and you can size that window larger to see more.
I see them all, but I don't like any of the answers.
You haven't given a choice like I'm doing this work.
Right,
Oh, there was no other. Okay.
or not
ah,
a-
I see.
So-
So there could have been another, agreed.
there
Yeah.
could have been, I'm already doing something.
Sure. So for those of you who this applies to, feel free to answer that. I was hoping that the first question was going to be shared, not the second one, so there was no time to lead into that. So I'm going to end the poll for the sake of brevity. And for the first question, broadening an understanding of Prout theory and its applications in the subject of climate justice was the primary answer. 47% of the people here participated, and 4 out of 8 of the people who participated chose that one. Second was learning what others are doing to replicate efforts locally. Okay. So in answer to that, I'm going to share the next slide. This is from Pierre Sarkar's Capitalism in 3 Spheres. Casting aside all their inertia and prejudices, intellectuals will have to mix with the common people and engage themselves in their welfare. They'll have to assist the common people in their development and extend their support to all anti-exploitation movements. This approach will help to root out exploitation, stabilize the structure of society, and expand the intellectual standard of the common people. Human society will move forward to a brilliant future with rapid steps. And so all of us have various sentiments that we bring with us into the work. And what I find myself doing on a daily basis is examining the dogmas and baggage that I bring, so to speak, that is keeping me from being effective when I communicate with others, so that I don't hold back and am engaging in that, intellectual mingling with the common people, although I very much consider myself to be one of the common people. So the inferiority and superiority complexes in the political, cultural environment where I'm doing my work is would be considered by some to be an incredibly conservative, right-wing environment on colonized land where a history of land theft and extreme disparity between those who have and have not still exists. And so when I'm interacting with select board in any of the given towns I work with, I'm not talking to them about climate adaptation. I start a conversation with, there's money available for something that's important to you. And I've spent the time understanding what is important to them so that when I bring this money to them, they feel that they've been heard, someone's paying attention to what's important to them, and it begins the process of building trust. And this is important because in the context of DEIJA, diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and access, which is the go-to, are we doing this right? Oh, we've got to have a DEIJA analysis, perspective, training on our methods. The go-to method in this time and space where I'm working is often to find an Indigenous person, get them to give a presentation and tell you what is going on and what's going, where can you guys do better? And it creates an incredible disparity in those who are live here, who might be poor, working class, descendants of colonizers that were forced to come here because they were social outcasts in the British Isles and survived thousands of years of attacks from the church on their own indigenous practices. And so it's important to meet people where they're at. And in order to do that here, I'm constantly mindful of where I'm bringing assumptions to the conversation, hopefully in advance. And if they get caught in the communication with the people I'm working with, then we talk about it. Hopefully they have the trust to tell me what they're thinking and what's not working, so that we can continue to move forward together. So the biggest piece of advice I could give based on my experience is just to meet people where they're at, and I just do what I say I'm going to do. And I don't spend extra time talking about why they should do anything. Rather, I consider that I'm not working with the other side as some would, but that we find common ground in our interpersonal interactions and we defend and protect and enhance it together. And funding for the political leaders here and public opinion is something that is really important to them. So I have to recognize in my presentation and in communication with them, which is on TV every time I have a conversation, or could possibly the contracts and agreements that allow this work to be done could be in the newspaper, have to be very clear in what the ask is and what the relationship is. And the more moral, spiritual, physical example and leading by example, I think has such, is so powerfully boiled down into the power of the word and recognizing the language we use and what assumptions or projections might be, or erasures might be contained or not contained in the language. And when you walk the talk and your footprints go in that direction, and I just see that is what builds trust and then allows those who you've been interacting with to feel that we're all moving forward together, and that is the overall goal. That is a lot to contain in one little setting there. So the the three-tiered economy, this is my depiction of the three-tiered economy and what it looks like in the framing of donut economics, where inside the circle are those who do not have their needs met and the people and needs that are falling through the cracks of the system. And then the outside of the circle, the planetary boundaries we have to stay within, for example, limiting carbon emissions. And it's in this area in between where the work on climate adaptation takes place, in physiological watersheds that involve overcoming sociopolitical boundaries and strengthening networks by being aware of what they are and who they are. And this network is expanding around the world. And I think, I have to thank John for this, bringing this concept up, the concept of the blessed unrest, that I really believe we are involved in, all of us in this work, the largest mass scale intentional adaptation moment in the history of humanity, or maybe this time around, if you think we may have been here before. So that's what I got.
Thank you, Ashrita. So we'll be taking questions for about 5 minutes. Please feel free to submit questions on chat or raise your hand. So I do have a question for you. You insisted on meeting the people where they are at, right? So Proutists must reach out and Proutists must meet people where they are. So do you have any suggestions for groups Proutists can connect with who are actually working on the same lines as us for ecological restoration and regeneration?
I would say it depends on where you are and what your role is locally. And that determines what other similar positions might exist in replicable networks. If I go back to the network slide that I showed, if I were to direct you in one place and I didn't understand you or where you are or what you contribute, then I would be misleading you. So can you specify us and what that means?
So in general, right, I would probably go link up with organizations like Climate 350 in my local area. And like you said, they're all focusing mostly on carbon dioxide reduction, but we know that regeneration of local resources and local economy, that's the way to go. So I was just wondering if you have resources or groups in mind that you could share on chat or later.
So 350.org are you in Arizona?
Atlanta.
Atlanta. Yes, but I can't just name them off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think that the Union of Concerned Scientists and 500 Women Scientists are two organizations that I've worked with, and the Society for Ecological Restoration is another one that I've been a part of.
Okay. Thank you for that. And if you have any resources in mind, let us know. One hand is up. I think it's Mark. Can you unmute yourself, Mark?
There we go. Prout is very heavy on intellectuals and very good at talking to each other, explaining each other, going into great depth. We've been a little bit weak on translating what we have learned in a languaging it to reach out to the common people. And I think that is an area for growth. And an example to do that is start with your neighbors, start with people around you, start conversations with people who are different than us. go to activities that they go to, even if it means going to a square dance, whatever, where you can connect with them. And I find it's important to understand their perception of what their needs are. We have our perceptions of what we think they need, but what do they see as they need? They need, they need jobs. You might hear things like job security, health and medical care. And a place I find an interesting crossover is representation, without mentioning Prout to say, well, what if our representation was by what we do rather than by these gerrymandered districts? And when I lived in Montana, that's a anti-tax state, I said, well, what if our taxes first went local, then they went regional, and then what was left over went national, and then something beyond that international? I find very conservative, libertarian people light up at that idea, but we need to be able to reach out and language in a way where people feel we're really listening to them. And if we can get a little deeper, what's their pain that causes so much anger?
Yeah. Thanks for the thought, Mark. So there is one more question. Shri, if you want to just respond to it in chat, that'll be helpful, I guess. Specific examples of walking your talk as it applies to climate change resiliency and Proutists. So if you could respond to that in chat, we'll move to our next speaker.
Did you say answer it in the chat?
Yes, if you could. Can you? Okay. Let's move to.
I could spend the rest of the time we have here doing that. So I think that walking your talk in terms of climate change is one thing that I could give an example here of what that looks like. And Proutist, I'm still trying to connect with all of you and understand what our working relationship is so that I know how to even approach that topic.
Okay. Okay, but the question is up there for all of us to think about a little. Anyway, our next speaker is Dada Veda. Dada Veda is a yoga meditation teacher, author, editor, and a singer-songwriter. He was one of the authors of the Prout chapter in the book that was published in conjunction with COP26. Dada Veda will share his thoughts on application of Prout theories to address systemic issues that have caused climate change. Over to you, Dada.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. And I'll do the slides. Okay, so welcome everybody from whichever time zone you're in, and you could be watching a replay, so we don't know when you're watching, but I welcome everybody. So it's a grandiose thing, Prout solutions to climate change, but rather than solutions, because there are no silver bullets that we have in our pockets, but I want to show how the basic structures that Prout would put into place and its principles and policies, how just from looking at those, what impact they could have on our present situation. So I'll start. Main thing when it comes to dealing with very difficult problems is that you want the right people to be at the helm to decide what to do and what not to do. And today, you know, we have a system where the people who are making the decisions are not doing it based on the well-being of the society, but they're usually making those decisions based on their own personal or sectarian or group interests, and not for the benefit of all. So there are several policies and structures which would help to bring about this better decision-making, which we really need when we confront very difficult problems. So Shri mentioned the three-tier system. And many of you have heard that, but it could be anybody coming in because this thing will be recorded and put on the Prout website. But we want a system, as shown in her diagram, where the smallest scale would be the privately owned businesses with maybe 20 people. We haven't really defined that exactly what it would be, but they're not very important. And then there would be a large sector of worker cooperatives. But regarding climate problems, one interesting thing is that the key industries, the mineral extraction and power production, these should be run as utilities, and these should be run in the public interest. So these days, whenever we talk about policies for emissions and things like that, we say, oh, what was big oil going to say about it? Well, forget it. We take them out of the picture. It's revolutionary, but it has to be done. And I think, my opinion is, at least in the small liberal circles I've tested it, there's a lot of, there'll be a lot of support for when we say public management of these crucial industries. I think we're going to get a lot of support from people. Maybe we'll go down to even the people who don't identify as liberals or progressive, but when we say public, people say, if you say government, oh, but if you say, no one says I'm sending my child to the 3rd grade in the government school, we go to public school. So we have to get this idea of what is public and what is private, and people have to understand that. And when we put the important things in the public sphere, then I think we're going to get much better outcomes. So the street tier system of Prout has a lot to offer in this whole situation. This is my opinion in any case. And then there's another part of Prout which is very important. In the presentation of Raksha, when she started off, she mentioned that at the COP conference, most of the people were lobbyists. So why are there lobbyists? Because there's special interests. And people who have accumulated wealth have this special interest, and they pour that money, they pour it into the national structures, and even on the international scene, they're meddling. So Prout has this very important first fundamental principle, which says that accumulation of wealth should be a matter of society. Society will decide if there are some limits that people should have. And when this is really done in the future, this is also another very revolutionary step, then these nefarious interests, people who don't have the welfare of society in their mind, they will be taken out of the picture also. So this is really, it's needed. We're not going to be able to make big progress until these kind of economic and political imbalances are dealt with. And this concept of Prout of the wealth cap, the society will decide how much people should accumulate. And when that happens, you'll see there'll be a very huge change. And then, like I said, we have to have the right people making the decisions. So we need leadership of wise people. And in Prout, in Sarkar's philosophy, we have this Sadvipra leadership idea. And the idea basically here is moral leadership, people who service-minded. So these days, we say somebody gave their life to public service. No, it's not public service. They were in the Congress for so many terms. They spent their whole life in political office. That's not public service. So in the future, when we choose according to what people actually did, like what Shri mentioned, when we find the people who walk their talk, who are the people who helped the society, who are the people who did something. And when those people are in the helm and they're elevated to the important decision-making structures, then also it will have a huge impact. And so, because we don't know really, what to do about all the very intricate problems of whether we're going to have an ice age or we're going to have we have too much heat or whatever. But at least when we have our most intelligent, our wisest, our most moral people in making the call of what should be our decisions, we will have a better outcome also. So this is a very important concept, this concept of moral leadership, of proper leaderships. Spiritual leadership, I'll get into that also. And then another part that is very important, we need global structure. We have anarchy now. So even though we have these meetings of the COP, this and number 25, 26 or whatever, but they're always flawed because there are one country can opt out. Like we had this Paris Protocol, remember that some time back, and then the US wasn't a part or became a part. But why should any individual country have the option of making this kind of decision? So this world government, although it seems like a dream, but it's becoming a necessity. And we remember also another important thing was when some years ago there was the hole in the ozone layer that took international, transnational action in order to address that. And fortunately, it was addressed. It was actually a very serious threat to health on Earth. So we made it, but we need better global cooperation and coordination if we're going to handle the different kind of situations which come in the future. But this is also something which Prout offers, and I don't see it anywhere else. Even when we submitted our chapter to this COP review, climate adaptation, they didn't want our input about world government. I don't know why they didn't want it, but anyway, that's their editorial decision. Now, there's another important thing about Prout that's can be very helpful too. And this was also mentioned in the previous things about the Jason mentioned the PROMA and the balance. So we want, on the Prout, there'll be self-sufficient economic zones with balanced economies. And this will reduce the wasteful global trade and transportation. So, you know, you pick up something and then you look at it, it says made in China. Why? The simple plastic item, why we had to go all the way to China to make this thing. And the economists say it's comparative advantage, but it's not a good solution. It's not a good thing because we cannot just go on with our global trading and manufacturing in the way that we're doing it now. So when there are self-sufficient zones in the different parts of the world, and they will be in ecological balance. This is also another thing about balance. Why do people want to come to the United States? You know, all the people from Central America and, you know, South America, whatever, these nice warm places, the places where we go to vacation, but there are no jobs for them there, so they come here. So we need, when we have the self-sufficient zones, there'll be much better equipoise, equilibrium between these different zones. So this is very important. This is also, this would be a revolution. This is revolutionary. If someone tried to do this, it would be revolutionary. Yes. And then there's one more thing which is lacking in the world today. We have to balance individual and collective interests. Now, if someone was pressed me in an elevator to describe, well, how does Prout stand as vis-a-vis, let's say, communism and capitalism, I would say capitalism places the emphasis on individuals at the expense of the society. And you think about the US, where just everybody has so much luxuries, this and that, and then the infrastructure is collapsing. And then communism had the balance completely wrong the other way. They glorified the state at the expense of the normal, ordinary person. So they had Sputniks in the sky, and in the homes they didn't have refrigerators. So this was their problem. But Prout gets that balance in a better way. So it's one of the principles of Prout that we should take care for the development of the society, but also the needs of the individuals. And when we get that balance right, then it will have impacts. And here's one area which I think is important. Like for instance, one would expect, there'll be more attention to public transportation rather than individual car ownership in a Proutist society. So this is just one example, but when we start to think about also the needs of society, it will help the environmental decisions that we have to make. So I think this is really a crucial thing to get that balance right of individual and collective. And I think Prout has a lot to offer in this thing. And then I think this is the last point. This is a very important point also. This elephant in the room for Prout, but it's a spiritual theory. It comes from spirituality, and we want to build a society where people, what is the goal of life? If you ask people, they want to get this much money and that much, and they want this job, the general thing in the American dream or this dream or that. But if people also start to dream about what they could achieve, above materialism, and their spiritual goal and even their intellectual goals, and what will happen in that kind of society, people won't build up, buy things and throw them away and then consider that that's economic activity and that's economic growth. But there'll be, because of automation in the future, people won't have to work that much. But what will they do? They're not going to do nothing. They're going to be doing the arts, and they're getting learned in all kinds of the science, and they would develop their education and music and skills. And this is a great kind of growth or activity, and it won't take such a toll on the environment. And I think that, I know that for my life, people who have gone in this way of development of their spiritual life, we need less things to make us happy. And this is very important, I think, for the future of the society, whether it be an ice age or a heat age, or, it doesn't matter. But if people are focused in the proper way, then we'll be able to enjoy it and handle it. So this is, and also regarding the, I'm not sure if I have another thing after that. No, I don't. I didn't go back. 1 second. Well, anyway, I don't have another slide, but I wanted to say one more thing about the spiritual approach. We're talking about, Jason was mentioning about trees and all that, but I want to say that in the Proutist approach, a tree is not just an economic resource, because we want to develop the physical, the mundane, and the supramundane. A tree is also a supramundane. There's aesthetic value, and and we want to develop the spiritual values. Maybe the tree, that's the place where we're going to do meditation. So we have to think about all these things when we're evaluating what we need and what we don't need. And I think that Prout has a lot to offer to the conversation. So, but we don't have the silver bullet, but we have a lot of structures, policies, and ideas, and they have to be applied. That's the devil's in the detail, of course, of applying them. But I think there's a great possibility in the future for that. And I have one thing I want to do, a little shameless plug. I wrote this book. It's called Prout Explained. And I talk about some of these things, not so much in relation to climate, but all of these things about what is a three-tiered economy, what is a balanced economy and decentralized economy. So these are very important things, and we have to know them, and we have to share them with others. Okay, that's my thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Dada. So everything you spoke about points to changing some part of the system by applying Prout to it. But it's unfortunate that people are focusing on something like carbon capture technologies instead of regeneration. Instead of completely changing the system, they're trying to put a band-aid on existing systems. So that's a comment I wanted to make. Any questions for Dada? And Dada, you may want to end your screen share.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize I had it still on. Yeah. Okay.
I'd just like to add that I find trees to be an incredibly deeply profound spiritual resource, and miss them terribly when I'm not around them. So I consider them to be beings that I have personal relationships with that have helped me through my life. And so when I hear in the course of my work and in others, protecting the resource or, planting trees for carbon capture, I think that speaks to the overall potential for psychological shift in relating with the flora and fauna as our relatives, and using language that reciprocates, it demonstrates a reciprocal relationship in our language with them, to kind of frame it in a new humanistic way.
Marie has a question in the and then Alex, so I'll answer Marie. She said public industry is going to public ownership, will still be funded by the government. Okay, what is public ownership and what is public management? It is the government, but it's not the central government. It'd be some kind of a more local, more immediate, such as like state government, or if there's no state government, because there are some structures in the world where they don't have strong state governments, there could be a public board set up, and they would manage it, like we have the Tennessee Valley Authority. And yeah, so those funds, that's part of the government budget, that is, but they will be run not for the profit of shareholders, but they will be run for as utility, no profit, no loss, and for the public well-being. So I didn't say government ownership and management because people will freak out, but I say public. But public, what does it mean? It means some kind of government, but it has to be a moral government, a good government. So we have Daivati has one, and then also before that I saw that Alex in Maine has one. So
Dada, can I suggest, I saw Alex hand go up and Daivati's go up, but in the interest of time, we'll come back to these questions in the end, so that the next panelist gets a chance to speak.
okay, good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, or please go ahead and put your questions on chat and Dada can look at them. Okay, so our next speaker is a guest of Prout Alliance from across the Atlantic. So Prakash, Filippo Basso, he's with us today. Filippo is the overall coordinator and strategic planner of the Ananda Valley, a conscious local development project in Portugal, and director of the environmental association EcoActivo. Master units such as Ananda Valley are integrated development schemes around the world that present a practical model for application of drought and climate resilience. So Prakash will be talking about his work in Portugal with us. Over to you, Prakash.
Thank you for the presentation. I will just share a few slides. Hearing speaking a lot and very much on the big scale, I feel a bit intimidated because I'm just representing a very small project in Portugal. But still, I think that this can complement, not to have the big picture, and at the same time also having some local project that can act in several ways. I try now to write some notes about how a project like ours can support the big scale Prout vision. So share screen. 1 second. I think it's this one. If you can see. So Ananda Valley is a master unit project. It's based in Portugal, in central Portugal, in one of the more needed area in Portugal. And what I'm going to quickly depict is, of course, we are in what we call usually here in Portugal the perfect storm. We are having several crises going the same moment, and living here in this part of Europe that is a bit more on the side and with several social environmental problems is a nice place where to take some steps and understand what we can do from a local viewpoint. Ananda Valley is a multidimensional development project, is in the center of Portugal, actually in between Lisbon and Porto, but in the interior of the country where we have a lot of desertification and a lot of social problems, not to count with the big fires and environmental problems. I'm just writing here some notes in the slide, but the main idea, I think everybody of us will know what is a master unit. Just to summarize for the general public, we can think about master unit is a PSRCAV concept. We can think about a local, rural, resilient, social environmental project based on mainly service and self-development. The project objectives, I think that every master unit has different, let me just move this Zoom window, otherwise I cannot read properly. Every master unit has then their local implementation, their local objectives. At the moment, up to today, after, let's say, 10, 12 years of working in the region, these are the main pilot objectives. So first of all, to create a model for sustainable conscious living, based on neo-humanistic and Prout. To act as a mindful social hub. So the idea is to bring together different people that have different and sometimes also not slightly conflicting vision, with the idea of bringing more energy to alternative approaches, both on a social and environmental ideas. To help improve the quality of life of all living beings around the area. Is a master unit usually is a local project. So here in Portugal, we focus mostly in the Cova da Beira or in the area surrounding the Serra da Estrela Natural Park. To strengthen local economy and surrounding communities, we are having a lot of local projects. I can also speak later. The idea is to start a small groups or association, informal group or association or cooperative that work on specific themes, and to promote aware, healthy and ecological choices. This is one educational, mainly for me is of a big educational value. I was trying to understand how such a project, for example, can support why, which is the reason of supporting climate justice from such a small center. But the first thing that came to my mind is mostly an educational function, both non-formal and informal. We have also some research and the idea of cooperating more with the local university and polytechnics as a living lab. So interacting with the local, also the local institution, the local, well, the Portuguese environmental agency, to understand how generic ideas on a world or European level can be exactly implemented in Portugal or in a specific area of Portugal. Then I see also as a nursery of social environmental projects. As I will see in the next slides, there are several projects that even if the COVID atmosphere didn't allow us to be as efficient as we would like, I think that it's really amazing about the new project that can be born around such an ecological center. And the idea is to work at grassroots, to work on a low level, but trying then to bring this solution up to a global solution. I will speak also about later about the importance of a network. So how at the moment many of these projects are working as individual point, and sometimes there are some network connecting several, let's say, enlarging the terminology of master unit. Let's speak about something that is more common. For example, eco-villages. There are a lot of network of eco-villages, and in the same way, to have a network of master unit would be supporting this as a little bit like nerve centers for society, so that we can really input and have some sort of exchange of alternative idea inside society. So I'm just showing a few more slides. what we're doing here. For example, let's say that working with teams, usually at the moment we can host team only of between 40 and 60 youths per project on several teams. Some are more related with personal development, some more about ecological, reforestation, water management, all teams that can be somehow related with, in this case, healthy lifestyles. Also, we had one project related exactly on Prout topics. We try to inspire, for example, artistic movements so that they can transmit these more subtle ideas through art. In this way, for example, we have the Ananda Festival of Bliss, that is the first yoga and art festival without drugs. At the beginning, it was received quite in a strange way, because in Portugal, festivals are always associated with some other way of enjoying life. And we show that, no, it is possible to do with our own creativity and with our own joy of life. Other ideas, of course, we had in the past years a lot of economic democracy platform and forums, and at the moment we are focusing on system change initiatives. We have here the Prout Research Institute of Portugal, cooperating mainly with the local universities and the local institutions. On local level, BioEco co-founders, BioEco at the moment is an association. We hope that soon can become a cooperative of organic producers. It's the first organic producer association in our region. And now, after several years, we are helping it to develop, and we begin to have quite good results. Of course, internally, we try to be as much as we can sustainable for what we concern food and basic necessities. In this case, for example, about organic vegetable, fruit, and aromatic herbs, we have our own internal production, and we hope that with the entrance of new people every year, we can begin also to be able to export. At the moment, export outside the master unit to the local community. At the moment, we just consume internally. We opened actually 2 vegetarian restaurants, but then during the COVID period, the one in Coviglia had to stop. We have only at the moment a very beautiful vegetarian restaurant in Fundao, is the local municipality, where we are developing not only, let's say, the vegetarian side, so proposing some different choices for the day-to-day food for the people of this municipality, but also acting as a social hub for the local community. And about that, I'm just okay. So we also created Ecoattivo more recently. Is an association most focused on environmental topics, and at the moment we are working on several topics I will show in the next slide. These began, let's say, at the beginning, all these social environmental projects have a very strong environmental component, but since when we began really to create a focus group on the specific topic, I think that we got a lot of result, both in impact on a local level, also, let's say, cooperating with other regions, with the other countries in Europe. I think we got some beautiful results, even if the number of the associates is just growing in the last 2 years. We are not many people. Also, supporting disaster relief operation through other NGO, for example, AMORT, is quite of a big importance. And the fact of having a master unit, let's say, triggered the creation of many of those initiatives. And for me, most of all, the creation of specific group that focus on one topic in specific and can so achieve very good results. About the Ecoattivo side, also, that is the one that I'm very passionate about. We have several branches where we are focusing. Of course, in 2 years, we did some steps, but we would like to grow more and also cooperate with other pick-up environmental association through Europe and also possibly in other continents. What can I say? I really feel that when I hear speaking Dada or other people, this is just a small seed. It's just a small nucleus from where we can start spreading many ideas and putting in practice and experimenting and teach it to. Actually, 150 almost, I hope this year 200 people that are passing here every year to learn about ecology, about themselves, about society, about how we can do better choices in our life. But I think that this is not enough. For this reason, we were struggling in the last months during summertime. We started to understand what if we can really create a master unit network. So what can bring this? And this was the first step. I have here 3 slides about what can do as a support to the local master unit, to the local organization, to have a network so that we can help each other. And in this, I just launched a stone explaining, for example, to have increased access, for example, to expertise, to structured information, to news about what is happening in the world, also financial resources time to time. Increased efficiency in several other cases. I see here the linkage with other networks, leveraging on the network strength and reduce duplication of effort that many times happens in all the beautiful projects that we have around the world. Another big category of the reason of why do we need to have this kind of network is to have a multiplier effect. Of course, it's really different if one master unit work on one theme, or if we can join the effort of 3, 4, 5 master units only in Europe that are focused on, for example, on forest or on agroforestry, or how can I work on reforestation and the proper utilization of water. So there is a much bigger effect, especially if this is done at unison. And of course also the reciprocal support between master unit, because even if the main goal of such a project is to support the local community, to serve the local community, there is also a big need of supporting each other. And many times there are master units that have very strong characteristic in one topic, but then maybe they have specific needs. And another master unit can provide it without too much problem. So this is a short presentation of this drop in the ocean that is and the master unit that we have here in Portugal. I really hope that in the next years we can more and more cooperate so that we can understand better how to support the bigger vision, and how we can let's say launch a small stone so that more and more master units can become strong, can become efficient, and we can work together for this mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. There is already a question for you in the chat. So curious if Prakash would be willing to share slides. I'm finding them very helpful to understand the work there.
Yes, for sure. If we can just they can exchange via mail, there is no problem. I think I can also correct some mistakes before sharing with you. I saw some small mistakes.
So probably you could share the slides with me and I'll send it out to those who are interested. You can do that.
We can also, on the Prout Alliance website, we'll be having a video of this presentation. And along with that, we could probably have a link to the different presentations that were, so people can see the slides in addition to seeing the video that includes the material. And also we could probably turn the chat into a document that would probably be a useful resource on.
Yes. So any other questions for Prakash or any other thoughts people have to share? So Prakash, I guess you spoke about master unit networks, and I know that you're already trying to do that in some way, right? You're trying to bring together master units around the world in some way together, at least virtually, trying to put them all together as one resource on a website. So do you have anything to share about that?
Yes, so the the big dream began, let's say, in this year 2022, and the idea is to create some tools that can help this network to begin working. We actually, it was quite a big success at the beginning of the year, because when we presented this idea also to the Erasmus project in Europe, it was considered one of the best projects for the beginning of 2022, and so we began working on that. It is a long process, and one of the main problem is that people in master units are usually very, very busy focusing on all the different departments that that we have to develop inside the master units, and areas and social side and music and art and more the environmental side. So we have a more little time, we have quite a limited time for this kind of interactions, but we began again now at the end of the summer. And the idea is to begin with, let's say, first to start with a strong nucleus in Europe, because we are starting here and it's more easy for us to start. But already we understood that there is the need is not only here, and so the idea is to try to identify some other master units in several continents, so that we can enlarge this understanding. The main step for me at the beginning is understanding which are the needs of the master units. There are a lot of people that can provide support at all levels, and sometimes we find difficult to stop and understand clearly. Okay, we would work very, very well in this direction. Also clarifying our needs. Many times we speak about we would need a lot more volunteers here, because there is just one person running one big project all alone. And maybe the point is not to have volunteers. The point is to have somebody who can manage the volunteers, because then this becomes quite efficient and quite easy to be performed. So to help this process, I think it's really important. At the same time, to have regularly, at least yearly, meetings, conferences in person, at least on a sectorial level, at least on the European level. We want to begin in the spring or autumn 2023 to begin to have in-person conferences, so that we can make some step further. But this is a very small drop in the ocean at the moment, I see. But if somebody is interested, please, we can exchange the contacts, and we can see how to start doing this also more actively in, for example, in America or in other continents.
Sure. Jason's hand is up, so I'll give you an opportunity to talk.
I'll just pose the question. I know we're past time, but and I appreciate the distinction that you all in the paper made between like master units and eco-villages. I don't want to visit that, but the question I have is what kind of outreach or connection you've done networking with what are now being called regenerative hubs, places that aren't eco-villages, but that are more in line with the kind of integrated development of a master unit, and if you've done any kind of networking with non-Proutist regenerative hubs.
Yes, let's say in Portugal is quite easy. Portugal in a corner of Europe, so in our case it was quite easy. Let's say there are the classical. If we have to open a door, I think that we have to open this to several kind of movements. So if we speak about GEN, for example, the Global Eco-Villagers Network, we did several steps. Up to last year, it was more informal. We wanted first to become strong and try to be more active on a local level. But this year we began to make step on this side. We have in Portugal a lot of associations. So on the third sector, I think is the most efficient. We partnered with several around Europe, but mainly in Portugal. Another level that I think can be very important is on institution level. So we understood that there is a big need of interfacing and have more communication between the third sector and the local institutions. Sometimes there are rules and regulation and practices that the same people who work in this institution are partially agreeing with, but still is the status quo. So trying to speak with them and try to understand how we can overcome let's say, how we can implement better practices, I think can become one of the main one of the main deliverables from these master units from the institutional viewpoint. The research also, I think it can become important. The only problem about the research is that first we should be very, very stable. So to have already a group core of people and departments that are working independently very nicely, and then we can think about the research. Or at least this seems the more healthy way to do here in Portugal. And so for this reason, the research side is one of the next step to do, but we haven't yet begun actively to do on a regular basis, or at least as much as we would like.
This is John. I'd like to interject. If people want to stay on, we want to be sensitive to people's time and maybe other commitments, but we invite people, if you want to continue the conversation, to please, stay on.
That's the recording about now. Okay.
Yeah.